Hello and welcome. 3,000 years before the last war tears Corvair apart, the wind tastes different on your tongue. Salt and blood and desperation mingle in the air as the coastline materializes through morning mist. A gray smudge on the horizon that gradually sharpens into something real, something solid, something that might mean salvation. Behind, across an ocean that seemed endless during the crossing, Sarlona burns in memory. The homeland has become unrecognizable, consumed by forces beyond comprehension, torn apart by conflicts and catastrophes that drove thousands to risk everything on vessels barely seaworthy enough to survive calm waters. Let alone the storms that battered the fleet for weeks on end. Standing at the prow, spray soaking through already salt-stiffened clothing, watching that distant shore grow clearer with each passing moment, the exhaustion of months at sea weighs heavy in every muscle. Around and behind, dozens of ships struggle forward, their sails patched and repatched, their hulls groaning with fatigue that mirrors what every refugee aboard feels deep in their bones. Some vessels carry families huddled together for warmth and comfort. Others transport warriors still bearing weapons they hope never to use again. Craftspeople grip tools they managed to salvage. Dreamers clutch nothing, but hope that this unknown land will offer what Sarlona no longer could, a chance to simply survive. The woman who leads this desperate exodus stands calm amid the chaos, her gaze fixed on the approaching coastline with an intensity that seems to pull the ships forward through sheer force of will. Lhazaar. The name will echo through millennia. But now, she is simply a navigator following stars that offered no promises, reading currents that changed with the whims of forces older than human understanding. Her people follow because she has not failed them yet, because someone must lead, and she has proven herself capable of bearing that burden. No welcoming committee awaits on those shores. Jagged rocks tear at hulls that have already endured more than any shipwright would believe possible. Forests press down to the water's edge, thick with shadows and secrets, utterly indifferent to human need. The islands dotting this coastline are windswept and harsh, their beaches composed of gray sand and black stone that offers no softness, no comfort. But turning back is not an option. The ocean crossing nearly killed everyone. Attempting it again, with supplies exhausted and vessels damaged, would certainly finish the job. Landfall comes with relief and new fear intermingled, dragging ships onto those unwelcoming beaches, stepping onto solid ground that seems to sway beneath feet accustomed to constant motion. The reality of what comes next settles in. This land owes nothing to those who have claimed it. Shelter must be built from ship timber and driftwood, huddled structures that offer minimal protection against wind that never ceases. Food must be found in waters and forests, entirely unfamiliar. Every assumption must be questioned. Every survival technique adapted to circumstances nothing in Sarlona prepared anyone for. The soil disappoints immediately. Thin and rocky, suitable for hardy grasses and stubborn shrubs, but little else. It mocks the farmers who stare at it with growing despair. Forests, when expeditions venture cautiously inward, resist clearing with vegetation so dense that progress is measured in yards per day rather than acres. Game exists, but remains scarce and wary, having never learned to fear human hunters. Even the fish require techniques different from what anyone knows. Boats and nets that must be improvised from whatever materials can be salvaged or created. Days stretch into weeks, and each dawn brings new challenges that test endurance to its limits. Storms rise from the sea with terrifying speed, shredding shelters that took days to construct, forcing everyone to rebuild while fighting exhaustion that never quite fades. Injuries occur with brutal frequency, falls on wet rocks, cuts from unfamiliar vegetation, illnesses from food that looks safe but is not. The death toll from those early months haunts memory. Names spoken quietly around fires, reminders of the price this new land demands from those who would claim it. But adaptation runs deep in these survivors. Having crossed an ocean, having fled cataclysm, having endured what should have killed everyone aboard those ships, giving up now seems impossible. Slowly, painfully, understanding grows. The cold waters teem with fish once the patterns become clear. Once observation reveals where and when to cast nets. Salt can be harvested from tide pools and coastal shallows, a resource that will prove more valuable than gold, though none realize it yet. The very harshness that makes this land so hostile also forges strength beyond what comfortable living in Sarlona ever developed. This place might not welcome its new inhabitants, but it cannot break those who refuse to be broken. Lhazaar becomes more than a navigator during these brutal early years. When disputes erupt between different ships' companies over territory or scarce resources, her mediation carries weight that prevents violence from escalating into blood feuds. When raiders from other refugee groups, because Sarlona's exodus sent waves of desperate people across the ocean, not all landing in the same places, threaten the fragile settlements. Her strategic thinking organizes defenses that save lives. When exhaustion and hopelessness threaten to overwhelm those who question whether survival is worth this endless struggle, her presence reminds everyone that they accomplished the impossible simply by arriving alive. Settlements expand as more ships arrive, carrying additional waves of refugees who somehow learned that land exists, that survival proves possible. Each new arrival brings challenges and resources in equal measure. Some farmers eventually discover which crops tolerate these conditions, coaxing nutrition from reluctant soil. Fishermen recognize the potential teeming in these waters, developing techniques suited to local species and seasonal patterns. Warriors, traders, craftspeople, mystics, each adds knowledge and skill to the growing community, taking root in this harsh northern territory. But newcomers also bring warnings that add urgency to every effort. Sarlona's chaos intensifies, they report. Wars and catastrophes drive more people to risk the ocean crossing. Nations collapse as new powers rise, and in hushed voices around carefully tended fires, they speak of things best left unspoken, of reasons beyond simple warfare that made even the ocean's perils seem preferable to remaining. Whatever forces set these desperate migrations in motion cannot be allowed to follow across the water. This new land must become strong enough to defend itself against more than just weather and wildlife. The islands and coastline being claimed are not empty. The Dakani Empire, which ruled vast stretches of Corvair with unmatched military might, collapsed thousands of years before human refugees arrived. But goblinoids who built that empire have not vanished. Scattered tribes and remnant communities cling to ruins of former glory, regarding these human newcomers with suspicion that frequently erupts into violence. Early conflicts are brutal beyond anything the refugees expected. Neither side seeks these battles initially, but territory means survival, and survival is not negotiable. The goblinoids are not what preconceptions suggested. These are descendants of a civilization that mastered warfare to degrees few can match. Even scattered and divided, even shadows of their former strength, they possess tactical knowledge and combat prowess that makes every encounter desperate. Early settlements lose fighters they cannot afford to lose. Raids on both sides leave bodies uncounted and grievances simmering across generations. But gradually, through determination and adaptation, through the simple arithmetic that human refugees keep arriving while goblinoid numbers remain static, the balance shifts. Some conflicts end in accommodation rather than extermination. Certain goblinoid tribes, recognizing that humans are not leaving and that continued warfare benefits no one, negotiate arrangements allowing coexistence. Not friendships, rarely even alliances in meaningful senses, but agreements. Humans respect certain territories, certain ruins, certain practices. Goblinoids tolerate human presence in regions they no longer actively claim. It is the pragmatic peace of mutual exhaustion rather than understanding. But it holds mostly, allowing both peoples to direct energy towards survival rather than mutual destruction. Years become decades, become generations. Children are born who never see Sarlona, who know only these wind-battered islands and cold northern waters as home. They grow up hearing stories of Lhazaar not as a living leader, but as a legendary figure, the pathfinder who delivered their people from catastrophe. Her deeds grow with each telling, embroidered with additions that oral tradition always provides, until separating woman from myth becomes difficult. But core truths remain. She led them here. She kept them alive when survival seemed impossible. She laid foundations for something that might, if they prove fortunate and fierce enough, endure. Governmental structures emerging during these centuries differ from anything Sarlona knew. No king commands absolute obedience. No emperor rules through hereditary right. Instead, power coalesces around those demonstrating leadership through action. Ship captains who guided vessels successfully across the ocean find their authority respected in matters of navigation and seamanship. Warriors proven in combat with goblinoid raiders are deferred to regarding defense. Those with knowledge of farming, fishing, or trade rise to influence in their respective domains. This distributed leadership evolves into what becomes known as the hierarchy of princes. The term misleads somewhat, as these are not royalty in traditional senses. They are individuals commanding loyalty through demonstrated competence and personal charisma. Some rule single ships, others entire islands, but all hold positions through combinations of respect, fear, and acknowledgement that they deliver results. The strongest and most capable earn recognition as high princes, wielding influence over multiple communities, settling disputes that smaller princes cannot resolve. Lhazaar herself serves as first and greatest of these high princes, though no formal title captures the breadth of her authority. She is the final arbiter, the voice that can silence arguments and end conflicts through sheer weight of presence and history. But even she recognizes that no single person can govern all the scattered settlements now dotting coastline and islands. She encourages other leaders to rise, understanding that diversity of leadership strengthens rather than weakens collective survival. Laws governing this emerging society are simpler and more direct than complex legal codes of old Sarlonan nations. They root themselves in practical realities of maritime life, where clarity means the difference between life and death. Ship captains hold absolute authority while at sea, their word law until vessels return to port. Disputes are settled through direct confrontation when words fail, but within structures preventing personal conflicts from escalating into blood feuds that could tear communities apart. Theft of food or essential supplies is punished with severity that shocks those from gentler environments, but where scarcity remains constant threat, such harshness is understood as necessary. relationship with the sea itself becomes central to developing culture. Having crossed an ocean to reach this land, the ocean remains both greatest resource and most dangerous adversary. Reading patterns of waves and clouds becomes essential skill. Recognizing signs of approaching storms in time to seek shelter or secure vessels means survival. Rituals and traditions develop around departures and returns, acknowledging that every voyage carries risk, and not every ship leaving harbor will return. Stories are told of sea monsters and underwater ruins, of treasures lost in ancient wrecks and mysterious islands appearing only under certain conditions. Some stories are pure fantasy, but others, as time will prove, hold kernels of truth that early settlers encountered and survived. Islands develop distinct identities as more territory is claimed and settled. Some become known for fishing, their harbors filled with boats venturing out before dawn and returning at dusk with holds full of catches. Others focus on what limited agriculture the land permits, producing hardy vegetables and raising livestock tolerating harsh conditions. Still others become shipbuilding centers where craftspeople learn to work with timber from mainland forests, creating vessels that can withstand brutal northern seas. This specialization creates interdependence, each settlement needing what others produce, fostering trade networks that will eventually become foundations of economic strength. Mainland coastal regions present different opportunities and challenges than islands. The forests stretch for miles inland, dense and dark, and filled with dangers both mundane and magical. But they contain timber of quality and quantity the islands cannot provide. And timber means ships, and ships mean survival in this maritime world. Expeditions into the forest are dangerous undertakings, claiming lives with grim regularity, but rewards justify risks. Logging camps are established at the forest's edge, heavily fortified against predators and other threats emerging from deeper woods. Timber harvested there is transported to coastal shipyards, where master craftspeople shape it into vessels that will carry Lhazaar's people across the known world. As settlements grow more established, as survival becomes manageable challenge rather than daily crisis, attention turns outward. The ocean surrounding these territories is vast beyond measure, and curiosity flows as naturally as need for food and shelter. Explorers venture beyond familiar waters, mapping coastlines and discovering new islands, encountering peoples and places existing beyond the sphere of growing Lhazaar settlements. These expeditions are not always peaceful. Resources remain scarce enough that competition can turn violent with little provocation. But they expand the known world and bring back knowledge proving invaluable. Trade develops with other human settlements along the Corvair coast, communities established by different waves of Sarlonan refugees, or predating the cataclysms that drove Lhazaar's people across the ocean. Early trade relationships are tentative, often fraught with misunderstanding and mistrust. But they introduce new goods, new ideas, new possibilities. Salt harvested in abundance proves valuable to inland communities needing it for preservation. Fish caught in teeming northern waters can be dried or salted and traded far from coast. In exchange come grain, metals, textiles, and other goods that the harsh northern land provides only with difficulty. Princes controlling these trade routes grow wealthy and powerful. Wealth in Lhazaar settlements is measured not in land, which remains harsh and largely unproductive, but in ships, goods, and loyalty of skilled followers. A prince commanding a fleet of trading vessels who can guarantee safe passage through dangerous waters holds more real power than one controlling a large island, but lacking means to project influence beyond its shores. This creates dynamic political environment where alliances form and dissolve based on economic advantage as much as personal relationships. Culture emerging from these early centuries is shaped by environment and struggles required to survive in it. It values courage, self-reliance, and ability to face danger without flinching. It respects skill and competence above birth or wealth. Loyalty to ship and captain is held sacred, but individuals can seek new allegiances if current situations become untenable. It is a society of survivors who learned that the world offers no guarantees, and that strength, both personal and collective, is the only reliable protection against chaos. When Lhazaar herself finally dies, the entire confederation of settlements mourns. She lived long enough to see desperate refugees she led across the ocean transform into thriving, if still rough, maritime culture. She witnessed establishment of hierarchies and traditions that will define her people for millennia to come. She earned a place in legend that few living humans ever achieve. The principalities bearing her name are her monument, more enduring than any statue or tomb. The people calling themselves Lhazaar after her carry her legacy in blood and bones, in refusal to bend before adversity, in certainty that the sea is both highway and home. Generations that follow continue building on foundations she laid. They expand territory claimed, strengthen fleets built, refine maritime culture that emerged from desperation and determination. They face new challenges and new enemies with confidence born from knowing they already survived the impossible. They are Lhazaar's children, and they have claimed these cold waters and harsh islands as their own, paying the price in blood and struggle that the land demanded. What comes next will test them in different ways, but the core of their identity, forged in those early years of hardship and hope, will endure through whatever storms the future brings. Section 2. The Rise of the Principalities and the War with Lhazaar. Centuries pass like waves against stone, each one wearing away rough edges while leaving the core intact. The desperate refugees who first landed on these shores have become distant ancestors, their struggles remembered in songs sung by firelight, their names preserved in oral traditions that grow richer with each generation's telling. The harsh islands and windswept coastlines that once seemed so hostile have become home in the deepest sense, familiar and beloved despite their unforgiving nature. The society taking root here has become something unique in Corvair, shaped by isolation and necessity into a culture that exists nowhere else. Ships grow larger and more sophisticated with each passing generation, evolving from the cobbled-together vessels of the early years into purpose-built craft designed specifically for these northern waters. Shipwrights have learned through centuries of experimentation which woods provide the right combination of flexibility and strength, which joints and construction techniques can withstand punishment from storms that rise without warning from gray seas. The vessels sliding down launching ways into cold harbors are things of beauty and function intertwined, fast enough to outrun most threats, maneuverable enough to navigate treacherous coastal waters, and sturdy enough to weather conditions that would splinter lesser craft. These ships are more than transportation. They are extensions of identity, trusted companions that carry their crews through danger and deliver them safely home when luck and skill align. Wealth begins to accumulate in ways the early settlers could never have imagined. Fishing remains foundational to the economy, with techniques refined over generations producing catches that fill holds and provide surplus for trade. The salt harvested from coastal shallows and tide pools proves as valuable as promised, essential for preservation in an age before magical cold storage becomes common. Trade networks expand along the Corvair coast, reaching communities that welcome the reliable delivery of maritime goods. No longer is survival a question answered day by day with uncertainty. Now there is surplus wealth that can be invested in expansion, in improvement, in reaching toward opportunities that once seemed beyond grasp. But wealth breeds its own complications, and the competition between princes intensifies as stakes grow higher. The rough equality of shared desperation that characterized the early settlements gives way to hierarchy based on accumulated resources and demonstrated power. Some princes build fortifications on their islands, strongholds of stone and timber designed to withstand sieges. Others pour resources into larger fleets, understanding that mobility and reach translate directly to influence in this maritime world. the agreements and accommodations that worked when everyone struggled equally prove insufficient, when some have much and others have less. Alliances form and shatter with increasing frequency, sometimes peacefully through negotiation, sometimes in blood through naval battles that test ship against ship, crew against crew. These conflicts rarely threaten the society as a whole, but they keep everyone sharp, combat-ready, constantly aware that strength is the only guarantee of security that truly exists. The princes who thrive are those who master both aspects of power: the economic acumen to build wealth and the martial prowess to defend it. Reputation spreads along the coastlines of Corvair, and the name Lhazaar carries different meanings to different listeners. To merchants and communities that maintain good trading relationships, the Lhazaar people are reliable partners who deliver quality goods with remarkable consistency. But to those who refuse terms that seem reasonable, or who appear weak enough to exploit without significant risk, the Lhazaar are something far more dangerous. They are pirates, raiders who emerge from northern mists to take what negotiation cannot secure. The line between legitimate trade and piracy blurs in practice, a matter of perspective more than any clear moral distinction. It seems simply pragmatic. Negotiate when negotiation serves interests. Fight when fighting proves more profitable. This dual nature serves well for centuries. Trading when trade is advantageous builds relationships with communities that respect strength and offer fair exchange. Raiding when raiding seems the better option targets those showing weakness or disrespect. The most successful princes master the art of knowing which strategy serves best in any given situation, reading circumstances with the same skill their navigators use to read weather and currents. Society thrives on this flexibility, this refusal to be bound by rules and expectations that constrain other peoples. Coastal communities along Corvair learn to accommodate this presence, however grudgingly. They pay what amounts to protection fees to ensure Lhazaar ships pass them by peacefully, or they maintain defenses strong enough that attacking them would cost more than any potential gain. Some even welcome Lhazaar raids on their rivals, seeing these northern mariners as useful tools in their own political struggles. The Lhazaar become a force of nature in the minds of mainlanders, as inevitable and unpredictable as the storms sweeping down from the north. Adjusting behavior around them becomes simply the price of doing business in these waters. But growing power attracts attention from forces far greater than individual coastal towns or merchant companies. On the southern continent, in the heart of Corvair, something unprecedented is happening. A man named Galifar is uniting the 5 nations under a single banner, forging an empire through combination of military brilliance, strategic marriage alliances, and sheer force of will. Reports filter north of his campaigns, of armies moving with coordination never before seen, of battles won through tactics and magic working in perfect harmony. At first, these seem like distant concerns, problems for mainlanders that have little relevance to maritime existence in the north. That assessment proves catastrophically wrong, and the error becomes clear in the year 28 of Galafar's kingdom. By this time, Galafar I has successfully united the 5 nations and established himself as king over territories that dwarf the Lhazaar Principalities in size, population, and resources. But unification brings new priorities. The trade routes feeding his kingdom are being disrupted by pirates from the north, by Lhazaar vessels that respect no authority but their own, and take what they want from ships too weak to resist. Complaints from merchants and coastal lords reach his court with increasing frequency and increasing urgency. Something must be done about the Lhazaar problem. When Galafar's ambassadors arrive in northern waters, they are received with the caution born from centuries of self-reliance. They speak of benefits of joining Galafar's kingdom, of protection and prosperity that comes from being part of something greater than isolated principalities. They offer trade agreements, recognition of the prince's authority within certain bounds, and a place in the new order Galafar is building. But underneath the diplomatic language, the threat is clear enough. Submit to Galafar's authority or face the consequences of refusal. The princes debate the offer in councils that stretch long into the night. Some argue for acceptance, pointing out practical benefits of access to Galafar's markets and the danger of making an enemy of such a powerful kingdom. Others argue for maintaining independence, reminding everyone that their people did not survive the crossing from Sarlona and centuries of hardship, simply to bend their knees to a mainland king who knows nothing of the sea. Debates grow heated. Alliances within the principalities strain under the weight of this decision. But ultimately, enough princes reach the same conclusion. They will not submit. They will not trade freedom for promises of security from a king who has never felt salt spray or navigated by stars. The rejection reaches Galafar's court, and his response demonstrates exactly why he successfully conquered and united the 5 nations. He does not accept the refusal. He does not negotiate further or seek compromise. He sends his navy north with orders to bring the Lhazaar Principalities into his kingdom by force, if necessary. The war that follows will last nearly a decade and test the northern mariners in ways their ancestors' struggles against goblinoids and harsh nature never did. The opening battles go poorly, and hard lessons are delivered in blood and saltwater. Galafar's warships are larger and more heavily armed than Lhazaar vessels, built for combat rather than the combined purposes of trade and raiding that shape northern designs. His crews are disciplined and coordinated, trained to fight as units rather than the more individualistic style that prevails in the north. And his commanders use magic in ways that surprise and confound. Whether manipulation turning favorable winds against Lhazaar ships, divination revealing ambushes before they can spring, destructive spells that turn battles seemingly won into disasters. Ships and crews are lost in those early encounters, painful lessons that threaten the very existence of some of the smaller principalities. Panic ripples through communities as realization sinks in that this war might actually be lost, that centuries of independence might be ending. But panic gives way to something deeper, more fundamental. This is Lhazaar territory. These are Lhazaar waters, and the people who claim them are descendants of refugees who survived the impossible. They do not break easily. Tactics change, learning from defeats. Meeting Galafar's navy in open battle, where their advantages prove overwhelming, is abandoned as strategy. Instead, the fighting shifts to what serves northern strengths best: the intimate knowledge of waters and coastlines and islands that have been home for 1,000 years. Galafar's ships are led into traps, lured onto rocks hidden just beneath the surface, guided into narrow channels where their size becomes liability rather than advantage. Supply lines are struck, attacking the merchant vessels that keep Galafar's navy fed and equipped. Coastal settlements flying Galafar's banner are raided, forcing the enemy to divide attention between offensive operations and defensive concerns. The war becomes a grinding struggle of attrition that plays to northern strengths rather than southern advantages. Galafar's forces can win any battle they can bring their enemy to, but the Lhazaar refuse to be brought to battle on those terms. They fade into fog and mist that constantly shrouds these waters, appearing only when and where they choose to strike. They move through weather that grounds Galafar's fleet, using superior knowledge of local conditions to navigate what seems impassable. Losses are accepted when necessary, but commitments to fights that cannot be won are avoided. It is unglamorous warfare, exhausting and frustrating, but it works. Years pass, and the war grinds on without clear resolution. Galafar's kingdom continues to grow and prosper in the south, but his northern campaign drains resources and attention he would prefer to direct elsewhere. His advisors begin questioning whether conquering the Lhazaar Principalities is worth the cost. The territories they control are harsh and relatively poor in resources beyond fish and salt. The strategic value of the islands and coastline is real, but perhaps not sufficient to justify a war that seems to have no end in sight. voices in his court begin suggesting that accommodation might serve Galifar's interests better than continued conflict. The Lhazaar princes, meanwhile, have come to their own conclusions. They have proven they cannot be easily conquered, but they have also learned the limits of their power. Galifar is simply too large, too wealthy, too well organized to be defeated in any meaningful sense. Resistance can continue indefinitely, but driving him away or forcing surrender is impossible. The war has cost ships and lives and opportunities for prosperity that trade with Galifar's kingdom would provide. And there is recognition, grudging but real, that isolation and proud independence carry costs as well as benefits. Negotiations begin tentatively through intermediaries and unofficial channels. Neither side wants to appear weak or desperate, but both sides recognize that continuing the war serves neither's true interests. The discussions are complex and often contentious. Galifar wants recognition of his sovereignty, some acknowledgement that the Lhazaar Principalities exist within his kingdom rather than outside it. The princes want to maintain essential autonomy, the right to govern themselves according to their own laws and traditions. The challenge is finding language and structures that satisfy both requirements without requiring either side to abandon core positions. The peace that eventually emerges is a masterwork of diplomatic ambiguity. On parchment and in official proclamations, the Lhazaar Principalities become part of Galifar's kingdom. The princes acknowledge his sovereignty and agree to certain obligations, primarily related to curbing piracy against Galifar's merchants and providing naval support when requested. In exchange, they receive formal recognition of their internal autonomy, the right to maintain their own fleets and laws, and access to Galifar's markets on favorable terms. But the reality beneath formal agreements is more nuanced. True submission to Galifar, in any meaningful sense, does not actually occur. Self-governance continues as it always has, with princes making decisions without interference from mainland authorities. The obligations accepted are loose enough that they are fulfilled mostly at discretion, and the curbing of piracy proves relative. Raiding continues when it suits purposes, simply directed away from targets that would cause Galifar embarrassment. For Galifar, the arrangement provides what he actually needs rather than what pride might want. Disruption to maritime trade decreases significantly as raiding transforms into trading. His northern border becomes secure without requiring constant military attention, and he gains, at least nominally, additional territory and subjects to add to his growing empire. The fact that actual submission is largely fictional matters less than the practical benefits the peace provides. The Lhazaar emerge from the nearly decade-long war, transformed in ways only beginning to become clear. The conflict forced unity closer than ever before, with princes cooperating in ways that traditionally fractious politics rarely achieved. Hard lessons were learned that individual strength and courage, while valuable, cannot overcome organized military power when the scale difference is large enough. And something unexpected was gained: a grudging respect from Galifar and his kingdom, an acknowledgement that the northern mariners cannot be easily dismissed or ignored. The peace also opens doors that war kept closed. Access to Galifar's markets transforms the economy almost overnight. Salt and fish harvested in abundance suddenly have a much larger customer base willing to pay premium prices. Ships that proved their worth in combat find peaceful employment, carrying goods along the coastlines of Galifar's expanding kingdom. Shipwrights receive commissions from mainland nobles who want vessels combining northern maritime expertise with their own specific needs. Wealth flows into the principalities in quantities never achieved through raiding alone. Standing at this threshold, looking toward a future very different from the past, the transformation is both exciting and unsettling. The desperate refugees who founded this society are distant memory now, and even the pirate raiders of recent decades seem to belong to a previous era. Ahead lies something new, something only beginning to take shape. The Lhazaar identity remains, still defined by the sea and the harsh beauty of the northern home. But now there is also membership, whether fully accepted or not, in something larger. Part of Galifar's kingdom, part of Corvair's emerging interconnected civilization. How these new waters will be navigated will determine everything that comes next. The golden age of the Lhazaar Principalities is beginning, though none yet know to call it that. Section 3. The Golden Age, 800 years of trade and exploration. Peace with Galifar transforms everything, though the changes arrive gradually, like dawn creeping across cold waters rather than bursting forth all at once. The nearly decade-long war taught valuable lessons about power and pragmatism, but it also opened doors that had remained closed for centuries. Access to Galifar's vast markets, to the trade networks connecting the 5 nations, to the accumulated wealth and knowledge of the most powerful kingdom Corvair has ever known. These opportunities reshape what it means to be Lhazaar in ways both subtle and profound. The first change is economic, and it ripples through every aspect of life in the principalities. Salt, that humble substance harvested from tide pools and coastal shallows, becomes more valuable than gold in the markets of Galifar's growing empire. Every city needs it for preservation. Every household requires it for cooking. Every military campaign depends on it for keeping supplies edible across long distances. the Lhazaar Principalities can produce salt in quantities that stagger mainland merchants. And suddenly, there is a customer base willing to pay premium prices for consistent, reliable delivery. What was once simply a useful resource becomes the foundation of wealth that flows like an incoming tide, steady and inexorable. Fish follows the same pattern, transforming from sustenance into commodity. The cold northern waters teem with species prized in southern markets: cod and herring, and stranger, catches that mainlanders have never tasted. Techniques for salting and drying fish, perfected over generations of necessity, now serve commercial purposes on scales previously unimaginable. Entire islands dedicate themselves to processing catches, their beaches lined with drying racks, their harbors filled with boats that venture out before dawn and return, with holds so full the vessels ride low in the water. The smell of salt and fish becomes the smell of prosperity. Shipbuilding evolves from craft to industry during these golden centuries. The vessels that proved their worth during the war with Gallifar attract attention from mainland nobles and merchant princes who want the same quality and capability for their own fleets. Orders arrive from distant cities, requesting ships built to specific requirements, but incorporating the design principles and construction techniques that make Lhazaar vessels superior to almost anything else on the water. Shipyards expand along the coastline, their launching ways constantly occupied. The sound of saws and hammers, and craftspeople calling to one another, becoming the soundtrack of progress. The timber required for this expansion comes from the forests stretching inland from the coast, and the relationship with that wilderness deepens out of necessity. Logging camps that were once small and heavily fortified outposts grow into permanent settlements, still wary of the dangers lurking in the deeper woods, but now confident enough to push boundaries outward. The trees felled and dragged to the coast are massive, their wood dense and strong, perfect for the keels and frames of ships meant to last for decades. Trade routes develop between forest and shore, connecting the two different worlds that together make prosperity possible. But the Golden Age is not only about salt and fish and ships, though these remain foundational to everything else. It is also about exploration, about curiosity, finally having the resources and security to venture beyond survival concerns. Ships sail north into waters that have never been properly mapped, discovering islands that appear on no charts, encountering peoples and phenomena that challenge understanding. Some expeditions return with holds full of exotic goods, rare furs, unusual minerals, strange artifacts from ruins predating even the Dakhani Empire. Others return with nothing but stories, tales of sea monsters and magical phenomena and mysteries that deepen rather than resolve with investigation. The Western Ocean beckons particularly strongly, its vastness suggesting possibilities that fire imagination. Expeditions venture beyond sight of land for weeks, navigating by stars and instinct and magic, seeking whatever might lie beyond the known world. Some ships never return, swallowed by storms or distance or things that cannot be named. But others come back with reports of distant coastlines, of islands inhabited by peoples who have never heard of Galifar or Lhazaar, or any of the familiar names. Trade relationships begin to develop across these vast distances, exotic goods flowing in both directions, enriching both cultures in the exchange. Magic becomes more prevalent in Lhazaar society during these centuries of prosperity. Weather manipulation, once rare and expensive, becomes common enough that larger vessels carry spellcasters capable of calling favorable winds or calming dangerous storms. Divination helps navigators find their way through fog and darkness, reducing losses from shipwrecks and groundings. Preservation magic extends the shelf life of catches, allowing fish to reach markets farther inland without spoiling. The dragon-marked houses begin to take interest in the principalities, recognizing opportunities for profit in these waters. House Lhazaar, bearing the mark of storm, finds natural alignment with maritime culture. Their elemental galleons, ships powered by bound water elementals that can maintain speeds twice that of conventional vessels, begin appearing in Lhazaar waters with increasing frequency. Many Lhazaar ships and crews are hired by House Lhazaar to move cargo from one destination to another, creating partnerships that benefit both parties. This could imply that the relationship between the dragon-marked house and the principalities is one of mutual respect, based on shared expertise in maritime matters, rather than the antagonism that might be expected between competitors. House Orion establishes trade connections, following commerce across borders regardless of political boundaries. House Galanda provides services to travelers and merchants passing through the growing port cities. House Kundarak, though reluctant, maintains presence primarily due to their administration of Dreadhold, the infamous island prison said to be inescapable. Based on what we know about the dragon-marked house's general caution regarding unstable regions, their limited presence in most of the principalities suggests that while trade flourishes, the political volatility that defines Lhazaar culture remains a concern. Regalport emerges as the unofficial capital of the principalities during this period. Located on the island of Greentarn, it serves not as a center of government, but as the generally agreed-upon meeting place when the princes need to make collective decisions. It functions primarily as a trading post, home to the pirate exchange, where goods of questionable origin change hands with remarkable efficiency. All the dragon-marked houses maintain at least small outposts here, with House Orion and House Galanda establishing sizable enclaves. The political landscape during these 800 years remains characteristically dynamic. Princes rise and fall based on their ability to accumulate wealth and command loyalty. Some principalities grow powerful through successful trading ventures, building fleets that can guarantee safe passage through dangerous waters. Others maintain their position through calculated use of piracy, taking what they cannot earn through commerce, but being careful not to provoke Galafar's wrath. The Lhazaar pirates slowly develop into traders and explorers, keeping their illicit activities to a minimum so as not to attract the attention of Galafar's ever-improving navy. This transformation is not complete. Piracy never entirely disappears from Lhazaar culture, but it becomes more selective, more strategic. Ships flying Galafar's banner are generally left unmolested, while vessels from rival kingdoms or independent merchants who refuse to pay reasonable tribute find themselves targets of opportunity. Distinct principalities develop their own identities and specializations during this era. The Dire Sharks, with their seat at Port Verge on the southern tip of Quester, focus on legitimate trade, while their prince dreams of overshadowing Regalport. The Sea Dragons begin their rise to prominence, though they will not achieve their greatest power until later. The Bloodsails, elven refugees who settled on the barren isle of Farlnen, develop fearsome reputation with their ghost-powered ships and rune-covered red sails said to be drenched in blood. Based on their use of undead and necromantic magic, we can assume their connection to the blood of Val faith is ancient, predating their arrival in Lhazaar waters. The Cloud Reavers, consisting primarily of orcs and dwarves, long exiled from the mainland, stubbornly persist with bloodthirsty piracy, even after most other principalities submit to Galafaran rule. Tales of their raids under cover of darkness become some of the most horrifying stories told in coastal communities. That they maintain this independence for so long suggests either exceptional naval prowess or territories so remote, and fortified that subduing them would cost more than Galafar is willing to spend. The Wind Whisperers include a number of half-elves bearing the mark of storm, foundlings and excoriates with no tie to House Lyrendar. Their existence raises intriguing questions about Dragonmark inheritance and the relationship between the houses and those who bear their marks but reject their authority. This could imply that not all dragon-marked individuals accept the hierarchies imposed by the houses, and the Lhazaar Principalities offer refuge for those seeking independence. Centuries of relative stability allow Lhazaar culture to refine itself in ways the desperate early years never permitted. laws remain simple and direct, rooted in maritime tradition, but they gain nuance and complexity as the situations they must address grow more varied. The hierarchy of princes becomes more formalized, with recognized procedures for resolving disputes and mechanisms for collective decision-making when necessary. The title of High Prince emerges as designation for the most powerful and influential of the Sea Lords, though it carries no legal authority beyond what the individual can enforce. Art and music flourish in ways survival-focused early settlements could never support. Songs celebrating the crossing from Sarlona become formal ballads performed at gatherings of princes. Stories of famous captains and legendary vessels are refined and embellished, becoming part of shared cultural heritage that binds diverse principalities together. Ship figureheads evolve into elaborate works of art, carved representations of sea creatures and mythological beings, and abstract designs meant to bring luck or strike fear into enemies. The relationship between the principalities and the five nations deepens as centuries pass. Lhazaar ships become familiar sights in ports from Canath to Ondair, their captains known by name to harbor masters and merchants. Some princes establish permanent representatives in major mainland cities, informal ambassadors who facilitate trade and resolve disputes before they escalate. Intermarriage between mainland nobility and Lhazaar princes occurs with increasing frequency, creating family ties that complicate political relationships, but also strengthen bonds between North and Interior. Education becomes more formalized during this period, though it retains distinctly maritime character. Children learn navigation and seamanship alongside reading and arithmetic. Knowledge of weather patterns and ocean currents is considered as essential as history or literature. Apprenticeships remain the primary method of teaching specialized skills: shipbuilding, sailmaking, fishing techniques, with knowledge passed directly from master to student through years of hands-on experience. Religious practice in the principalities reflects the diversity of peoples who make their homes here. The sovereign host finds followers, particularly Kal Korin among merchants and Arawai among the relatively few farmers. The devourer receives dark worship from those who believe appeasing the god of natural destruction might spare them from storms and shipwrecks. The blood of Val establishes presence, particularly among the bloodsails, but also spreading to other communities where its promises of immortality and power through undeath find receptive audiences. The prosperity of these centuries is not without challenges. Competition between princes occasionally erupts into violence. Naval battles fought over fishing rights or trade routes, or simple matters of honor and reputation. Piracy, though reduced, remains constant concern for merchants and coastal communities. Storms and natural disasters take their toll, occasionally devastating entire islands or sinking fleets. But these challenges are manageable, obstacles to navigate rather than existential threats to survival. As the 800th year of the kingdom approaches, the Lhazaar Principalities have achieved something remarkable. From desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe, they have become thriving maritime culture recognized and respected throughout Corvair. Their ships are finest on the water, their navigators most skilled, their merchants most successful at finding profitable routes and cargo. They maintain independence within Galifar's framework, autonomous in practice, if not in theory. But nothing lasts forever, and the stability that allowed this golden age to flourish is about to shatter. In the year 894 of the kingdom, King Jarrat dies, and his heirs cannot agree on succession. The last war begins, and with it comes the end of everything Galifar built. The Lhazaar Principalities will face choices that determine their future in ways no one can predict. The Golden Age is ending, though those living through its final years do not yet realize what approaches. Standing at this precipice, enjoying prosperity and security that seem eternal, the storm gathering on the horizon remains invisible until it is too late to seek shelter. Section 4. The Princes and Their Domains. The Lhazaar Principalities are not one unified nation, and this becomes increasingly clear as the Golden Age matures and distinct identities solidify around different islands and coastal territories. Each principality develops its own character, shaped by geography, by the personality and priorities of ruling princes, by the opportunities and challenges specific to their locations. Walking the docks of different Lhazaar ports feels like visiting different countries entirely. Despite shared maritime heritage and common history stretching back to the desperate crossing from Sarlona, the sea dragons command respect throughout the principalities, and their domain represents the closest thing to traditional naval power that exists in these northern waters. Their fleet is the largest and most disciplined, operating with coordination that sometimes resembles a proper military force, rather than the loose confederation of independent captains that characterizes most Lhazaar operations. The princes who lead the sea dragons claim descent from Lhazaar herself, and whether this lineage is genuine or convenient fiction matters less than the fact that most people believe it, or at least pretend to for political purposes. Standing on the deck of a sea dragon vessel reveals the difference immediately. Everything is precise, ordered, maintained to standards that would satisfy even mainland naval officers. The crews move with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role and executing it without hesitation. These ships are built for both commerce and combat, capable of outrunning most threats, but equally capable of standing and fighting when necessary. The sea dragons focus primarily on legitimate trade, understanding that consistent, profitable commerce generates more wealth over time than sporadic raiding. But they maintain combat readiness that ensures other princes think carefully before challenging them. The sea dragon territories include some of the most prosperous islands in the Principalities, their harbors filled with merchant vessels from across Corvair and beyond. Warehouses built from stone rather than wood line the waterfronts, designed to last for centuries and protect valuable goods from fire and weather. The ruling prince maintains something resembling a court, with advisors and officials handling various aspects of governance in ways that mirror mainland kingdoms more than traditional Lhazaar informality. This sophistication attracts trade and investment, but sometimes draws criticism from more traditional princes who see it as abandoning the values that made the Lhazaar strong in the first place. Far to the north, on the island of Crag, the Cloud Reavers represent a very different approach to power and prosperity. These are the sky pirates of Lhazaar legend, operating airships purchased, stolen, or built through knowledge, acquired from House Lyrendar and other sources. The Cloud Reavers raid from above, their vessels appearing out of cloud, cover to strike targets that thought themselves safe from maritime threats. They are fewer in number than traditional sea-based principalities, airships being expensive and difficult to maintain. But their mobility and reach give them influence disproportionate to their size. Crag itself is a fortress island, its natural cliffs and defensive works making it nearly impregnable from sea assault. The harbors are carved into the rock face, hidden from casual observation, capable of sheltering both ships and airships from storms and enemies. The princes who rule from Crag maintain fierce independence, acknowledging nominal allegiance to the Lhazaar Confederation, while operating with near-total autonomy. Dealings with the Cloud Reavers require caution and respect, as they have reputation for taking offense easily and responding with overwhelming force to perceived slights. Farlnen lurks in the northern reaches, shrouded in reputation as dark as the mists that often surround its shores. The bloodsails who sail from this isolated principality are feared throughout the region, and not only for their combat prowess. The blood of Val maintains strong presence here, that controversial religion that views death and undeath as natural parts of existence rather than abominations to be feared. Rumors speak of undead crew members serving on bloodsail vessels, of necromantic rituals performed in hidden coves, of pacts with forces that most people would flee from in terror. Walking the streets of Farlnen's ports feels different from anywhere else in the Principalities. The atmosphere is heavier, darker, charged with energies that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Temples to the blood of Val dominate the skyline, their architecture incorporating symbols and designs that unsettle those unfamiliar with the faith. The people here are not monsters, despite what outsiders might whisper, but they approach death and existence with philosophical framework alien to most cultures. They see the blood of Val as offering truth that others are too afraid to acknowledge. That death comes for everyone. And understanding and even embracing that reality provides power and freedom. The Bloodsail fleet operates with cold efficiency that matches their grim reputation. Their ships are painted in dark colors, their sails marked with symbols that other sailors find ominous. They raid ruthlessly, showing mercy rarely, and then only for calculated reasons. But they also maintain their own code, their own honor system, and those who understand and respect it can deal with them safely. The Prince of Farlnen commands loyalty through combination of strength and religious authority, serving as both military leader and high-ranking figure in the blood of Val hierarchy. Port Verge, home to the dire sharks, represents another distinct approach to life in the Principalities. This principality focuses on fishing and maritime resource extraction. Their fleets venturing into the coldest and most dangerous waters in pursuit of catches that command premium prices in southern markets. The dire sharks earned their name from their willingness to hunt the massive predatory fish that lurk in deep waters, dangerous creatures that can destroy ships and kill entire crews, but whose meat, oil, and other parts are valuable enough to justify the risks. The people of Port Verge are rough even by Lhazaar standards, hardened by constant exposure to dangerous work in brutal conditions. Their ships are sturdy rather than beautiful, designed to take punishment from weather and wildlife that would splinter more delicate vessels. Walking through Port Verge during the height of processing season assaults the senses. The smell of fish and blood and salt is overwhelming. The sound of workers calling to each other and seabirds screaming fills the air. The sight of catches being processed on massive scales creates visceral understanding of how the principality generates its wealth. The dire shark prince rules through demonstrated toughness and success in the dangerous work that defines the principality. This is not a position won through political maneuvering or inherited lineage, but through years of surviving what kills most people and bringing back catches that enrich the community. The prince commands respect because they have walked the same bloody decks, faced the same terrors in deep water, and survived when others did not. The gray tide occupies territories where changelings form larger portions of the population than anywhere else in the principalities. Their maritime tradition incorporates shape-shifting abilities in ways that seem almost magical to outsiders. Gray tide vessels are known for their espionage capabilities, their crews infiltrating rival operations, gathering intelligence, conducting sabotage with skills that rely as much on changeling natural abilities as on traditional maritime expertise. The Grey Tide Prince is rumored to be a changeling themselves, though confirmation is impossible when anyone could be wearing any face at any time. Dealing with the Grey Tide requires accepting that deception and misdirection are simply part of their culture rather than signs of untrustworthiness. They view shape-shifting and identity fluidity as natural advantages to be used, no different from how the sea dragons use their larger fleet or the cloud reavers use their airships. Trade negotiations with Grey Tide merchants can be surreal experiences, as the person sitting across the table might literally be someone different than they were an hour ago. And determining whether this represents change of negotiator or simply change of appearance becomes exercise in futility. The Wind Whisperers include a number of half-elves bearing the mark of storm, foundlings and excoriates with no tie to House Lhazaar. Their existence raises intriguing questions about Dragonmark inheritance and the relationship between the houses and those who bear their marks but reject their authority. Based on the tensions between House Lhazaar and those who carry their mark but refuse their control, we can assume that the Wind Whisperers Principality offers refuge for those seeking independence from house hierarchy. The Heavenly Fleet and numerous smaller principalities fill in the remaining territories, each with their own character and specializations. Some focus on shipbuilding, their entire economy revolving around the construction and maintenance of vessels for their own use and for sale to others. Others serve as trading posts and waypoints, their locations on major sea routes making them valuable stops for resupply and repairs. Still others maintain more traditional raiding cultures, supplementing legitimate income with piracy directed at targets outside the protected sphere of Galifar's influence. The balance of power between these various principalities shifts constantly, driven by economic success, military victory, diplomatic maneuvering, and simple chance. A prince who makes profitable trades and wins necessary battles grows stronger, attracting skilled followers and acquiring better ships. A prince who suffers losses or makes poor decisions weakens, potentially losing territory to rivals or being absorbed into more successful principalities. There is no central authority to enforce stability, no king to arbitrate disputes beyond what can be resolved through negotiation or combat. The system is chaotic but dynamic, rewarding competence and punishing failure with brutal efficiency. Regalport occupies unique position in this complex political landscape. Located on the island of Greentarn, while technically ruled by a prince like any other territory, the city has grown large and wealthy enough to function as neutral ground, where representatives from different principalities can meet without triggering immediate conflict. The Regalport Prince maintains this neutrality carefully, understanding that the city's prosperity depends on being seen as a reliable meeting place for commerce and diplomacy. Violations of the city's peace are punished swiftly and harshly, regardless of which principality the offender represents. House Thurani maintains significant presence in Regalport, their operations based partly from the city while extending throughout the principalities and beyond. The Elven House provides entertainment and espionage services that prove valuable in the complex political environment. Though their true loyalties and ultimate goals remain mysterious even to the princes who employ them. The relationship between House Thurani and the various principalities is mutually beneficial, but tinged with wariness on both sides. The house needs the access and opportunities that Lhazaar territories provide, while the princes need the services and capabilities the house offers, but neither side fully trusts the other. Councils of princes occur irregularly, usually when circumstances force cooperation, or when disputes threaten to escalate into conflicts that could damage the principalities as a whole. These gatherings are chaotic affairs, with each prince jockeying for position, forming temporary alliances, and pursuing their own interests while nominally discussing collective concerns. Decisions require consensus among the most powerful princes, meaning that controversial measures often fail to pass no matter how sensible they might seem. But the system works well enough to prevent total fragmentation, maintaining just enough unity to present coherent face to external powers like Galifar, while preserving the independence that defines Lhazaar culture. Women hold positions of power throughout the principalities as readily as men, the culture valuing competence and strength over gender. Some of the most feared and respected princes are women who earned their positions through combination of martial prowess, commercial acumen, and political skill. The memory of Lhazaar herself, the woman who led the original crossing and founded the principalities, remains a powerful reminder that gender is irrelevant when it comes to capability and leadership. The martial culture pervading all the principalities, regardless of their specific focus or specialization, maintains sharpness even during the prosperous Golden Age. Every prince knows that strength is ultimately what guarantees security, that commerce and diplomacy function only when backed by capability to fight if necessary. Training with weapons remains an essential part of life, with even children learning basic combat skills before they learn to read. Ship crews practice combat drills alongside their normal duties, maintaining readiness for battles that might come without warning. This combination of commercial prosperity and martial readiness makes the Lhazaar Principalities formidable despite their relatively small population and limited territory. The Golden Age allows these various principalities to flourish in their diversity, each finding their niche and exploiting it to maximum advantage. The sea dragons dominate legitimate trade through discipline and scale. The cloud reavers control certain routes through air superiority. The bloodsails maintain their dark reputation while pursuing their own spiritual and commercial goals. The dire sharks provide resources others cannot or will not acquire. The gray tide offers espionage and infiltration capabilities that prove invaluable in a culture where information matters as much as ships. And dozens of smaller principalities fill in the gaps, each contributing to the whole while maintaining fierce independence. Standing on a high point overlooking the waters of the principalities during these golden years, watching ships and even airships moving across the sea and sky, the diversity and vitality of this maritime confederation becomes viscerally clear. This is not a unified nation moving in single direction under central authority. This is controlled chaos, a collection of independent entities united only by shared heritage, shared waters, and shared understanding that cooperation, however grudging, serves everyone's interests better than open conflict. It is messy and often frustrating, prone to inefficiency and internal competition that sometimes borders on hostility. But it is also vibrant and adaptive, capable of responding to opportunities and challenges with speed that more rigid governmental structures cannot match. The princes and their domains represent the Lhazaar identity in its full complexity: independent, pragmatic, martial, commercial, and utterly unwilling to bend to any authority they do not respect. This is the Golden Age at its peak, before the storm that will test everything they have built. Section 5. The Last War and Legacy of the Golden Age. The Golden Age does not end with dramatic catastrophe or sudden collapse, but rather fades gradually as the foundations of Galafar's kingdom begin to crack under pressures that build over decades. Standing in Regalport during the final years of unity, watching ships from all 5 nations mingling in the harbor alongside Lhazaar vessels, there is little outward sign of the storm gathering on the horizon. Trade continues to flow, wealth continues to accumulate, and life continues in patterns established over 800 years of relative peace and prosperity. But beneath the surface, tensions are rising that will eventually shatter Galafar's kingdom and transform the Lhazaar Principalities yet again. When King Jarot dies in the year 894 of the kingdom, and his children cannot agree on succession, the last war begins, and the Golden Age ends definitively. The conflict that tears Galafar apart transforms everything about life in Corvair. And the Lhazaar Principalities cannot remain isolated from consequences, even though the fighting occurs primarily on the mainland. Trade routes are disrupted or destroyed entirely. Markets that provided consistent demand for Lhazaar goods become inaccessible or too dangerous to reach. The various emerging nations try to recruit or coerce the principalities into alliances, offering inducements or making threats depending on their perception of Lhazaar's strength and usefulness. The princes respond to the last war with characteristic pragmatism and independence. Initially, the sea princes remain decidedly neutral, continuing as they had for many centuries to trade and explore the known world. But as the war drags on for decades, the princes begin to find the same argument that the dwarves of the Emror holds reach. Their agreement of fealty had been to Galifar and the kingdom, and with the kingdom now in ruin, they see their agreement as officially dissolved. Some princes form alliances with specific nations, calculating that backing certain powers will provide advantages when peace eventually returns. Others serve all nations as privateers, offering their ships and expertise to whoever can pay, sometimes working for multiple sides simultaneously in ways that would seem contradictory anywhere but among the pragmatic Lhazaar. Still others see the chaos as opportunity, engaging in outright piracy when naval forces that might have stopped them are occupied with warfare elsewhere. The principalities fragment somewhat during this period, with different princes pursuing different strategies. But the fundamental culture and identity established during the Golden Age proves resilient enough to survive even this catastrophic disruption. The decades of warfare are profitable for some princes and devastating for others. Those with the skill and fortune to navigate the complex political landscape, playing competing powers against each other while avoiding making enemies powerful enough to destroy them, accumulate wealth that rivals or exceeds what they earned during the Golden Age. Privateering pays extraordinarily well when nations desperate for naval power are willing to offer premium prices for ships and crews capable of breaking blockades, raiding enemy shipping, and conducting amphibious operations. But princes who choose poorly, who back nations that lose decisive battles, or who anger powers with long memories, suffer losses that sometimes result in their complete destruction. The day of mourning in the year 994 of the kingdom changes everything once more. When Sire is destroyed in a magical holocaust of unknown origins, over 1 million people perish in an instant, including Queen Danal herself. The sheer horror of the mourning, combined with the heavy losses incurred to the remaining nation's armies due to troops lost in Sire on that day, forces the last war to grind to a sudden, screeching halt. This could imply that even the pragmatic and often ruthless princes of Lhazaar recognize that some lines should not be crossed, that some weapons are too terrible to contemplate using. Negotiations for what will become the Treaty of Thronehold begin in the aftermath of the morning. The talks are held at the island of Thronehold in Sion's Sound at the invitation of King Caius III of Canath, and they drag on for nearly 2 years as representatives from all the powers of Corvair hammer out terms that can end the century-long conflict. The Lhazaar Principalities send their own representative to these crucial negotiations, and the choice of who will speak for the fractious confederation of independent princes becomes a test of internal politics as significant as any external diplomacy. High Prince Ryger Erwinarn, leader of the Sea Dragons, gathers a council of captains and goes to Thronehold to represent the principalities in the talks that end the war. Ryger has ruled the Sea Dragon Principality for 15 years by this point, building a fleet of 20 ships that can be outfitted as easily for war as for carrying cargo. Throughout his rule, he has claimed to have the blood of Galifar kings running through his veins, and whether this claim is true or convenient fiction, he has demonstrated remarkable charisma, a gift for leadership, and a head for strategy that makes him one of the deadliest captains plying the eastern waters. Based on what we know about the fractious nature of Lhazaar politics, Ryger's selection to represent the principalities at Thronehold suggests he commanded respect and influence beyond even what his impressive fleet might warrant. This could imply that during the last war, the princes recognized that presenting a unified face to the negotiating table would serve their collective interests better than sending multiple representatives who might contradict each other or reveal internal divisions. The Treaty of Thronehold is signed by representatives of all the powers of Corvair and officially ends the last war in the year 996 of the kingdom. The treaty recognizes the independence and sovereignty of the nations of Onder, Breland, Thrain, Canath, the Talenta Plains, Silargo, Cubera, the Lhazaar Principalities, the Emror Holds, the Eldine Reaches, Dargun, and Vaelnar. For the Lhazaar Principalities, this represents a fundamental shift in status. No longer are they nominally part of a larger kingdom, while maintaining de facto independence. Now they are officially recognized by all the sovereign nations of Corvair as an independent power in their own right. The recognition comes with expectations and obligations that the princes find both liberating and constraining. They must lower their flags of piracy and return primarily to the life of trade and exploration. Though pirates still hunt on the open seas when opportunities present themselves and risks seem acceptable, they gain legitimacy and the right to negotiate as equals with the other recognized nations. But they also lose some of the freedom that came from existing in the gray area between between legitimate and illegitimate, between subject and independent. High Prince Ryger returns from Thronehold with ambitions that extend beyond simply maintaining the Sea Dragon's position as the largest fleet in the Principalities. He wants to unite the Principalities under one banner, the banner of the striking Sea Dragon on a field of blue-green waves, the banner of Prince Ryger Erwinarn himself, working mainly as a merchant fleet for House Orion. The Sea Dragons hope to gain an even greater advantage in peace than they achieved during war. But uniting the fiercely independent princes proves extraordinarily difficult. So far, Ryger has been unable to convince the squabbling princes to do anything more than present a unified face to the deliberations at Thronehold. The post-war period brings new challenges and new opportunities. The dragon-marked houses, freed from the constraints of navigating Galafar's complex internal politics, expand their operations throughout Corvair with aggressive ambition. House Lhazaar in particular is intent on expanding its influence in the Principalities and ultimately gaining at least partial control over the Lhazaar merchant fleets. This creates tensions between those princes who see partnership with Lhazaar as pathway to greater prosperity, and those who view any house influence as threat to the independence that defines Lhazaar identity. The various principalities continue their distinct traditions and specializations. The Sea Dragons under Prince Ryger maintain the largest and most disciplined fleet, operating more like a proper navy than a loose confederation of independent ships. The Cloud Reavers still raid from their fortress on Crag, their airships appearing out of cloud cover to strike targets across land and sea. The Bloodsails continue their grim work from Farlnen, their connection to the blood of Val as strong as ever. The dire sharks hunt the dangerous waters for catches that command premium prices. And the Grey Tide, as some changeling maritime communities call themselves, continues to offer espionage and infiltration services that prove valuable in the complex new political landscape. Looking back from the perspective after the last war, the Golden Age under Galifar takes on almost mythical quality. Those 800 years of relative peace and prosperity seem almost unbelievable to those who have known primarily conflict and uncertainty. The wealth that flowed so freely, the opportunities that seemed limitless, the stability that allowed long-term planning and investment, all of these become subjects of nostalgia and longing. Songs are written commemorating the Golden Age. Stories are told of legendary princes and merchants and explorers who achieved greatness during those prosperous centuries. The period becomes benchmark against which all subsequent eras are measured and found wanting. But the Golden Age also prepared the Lhazaar Principalities for independence in ways that prove crucial when Galafar's kingdom collapses. The wealth accumulated provides resources to weather disruptions that would devastate less prosperous regions. The maritime expertise developed ensures that Lhazaar vessels remain superior to most others, even when access to certain materials or techniques is cut off. The culture of independence and self-reliance means that the principalities are not psychologically or structurally dependent on central authority, in the way that parts of the former Lhazaar kingdom struggle without it. And the martial traditions maintained, even during peaceful times, mean that the princes can defend their territories when necessary. The maritime traditions established during the Golden Age become so deeply embedded in culture that they persist even when circumstances change. The laws of the sea, those simple but absolute rules governing behavior aboard ships and in ports, continue to be respected because they have proven their worth through centuries of application. The hierarchy of princes, that fluid but functional system of distributed authority, endures because it accommodates the Lhazaar preference for independence while maintaining just enough unity to prevent total fragmentation. The balance between legitimate commerce and piracy, that pragmatic flexibility that characterizes Lhazaar approach to maritime activity, remains part of identity, even when external pressures demand at least superficial conformity to more conventional standards. The spirit of Lhazaar herself, that pathfinder who led the first crossing, endures in the culture she helped create. Her courage in facing the unknown ocean mirrors the courage required of every generation that followed. Her wisdom in establishing governance structures that balanced authority with independence continues to influence how the principalities function. Her refusal to surrender, even when circumstances seemed hopeless, echoes through the centuries in the stubborn determination that defines the Lhazaar people. She gave her descendants more than just safe landing. She gave them an identity, a way of being in the world that proved strong enough to survive everything history could throw at it. The Golden Age built empires on salt and steel, but the true empire was always the culture itself, the shared identity that persisted through prosperity and hardship alike. The salt that funded expansion came from the same tide pools that desperate refugees harvested from on the edge of starvation. The steel that protected merchant fleets was forged with techniques developed when fighting for survival against goblinoid remnants. The prosperity of the Golden Age grew from roots planted in desperation and watered with centuries of hard work, adaptation, and refusal to accept defeat. This is the legacy that endures, not just the wealth and infrastructure and knowledge, but the fundamental character that made all of it possible. The legacy of the Golden Age endures in physical form throughout the principalities. Regalport remains a major city, its stone buildings and defensive works testament to the prosperity that funded their construction. Shipyards continue operating with techniques and traditions developed over centuries. Harbors improved during the Golden Age still serve their purposes, protecting vessels from storms and facilitating commerce. Even smaller settlements benefit from infrastructure investments that previous generations made, foundations that support continued survival even when times are harder. Standing on a ship's deck in the years after the last war, watching the waters that have been home to the Lhazaar people for 3,000 years, the connections to the past remain visceral and immediate. The wind tastes the same as it did to those desperate refugees who first made landfall. The sea moves with the same rhythms that their ancestors learned to read and respect. The stars that guide navigation are the same stars that Lhazaar herself followed across the ocean from Sarlona. The core identity, forged through hardship and refined through prosperity, persists through all changes in external circumstances. The golden age of the Lhazaar Principalities, those 800 years of empire built on salt and steel, fishing and ships, courage and pragmatism, represents more than just a historical period. It represents proof that the desperate gamble made 3,000 years ago was worth it. The refugees who fled Sarlona sought nothing more than survival, but their descendants built something far greater, a thriving maritime culture that earned respect and prosperity through combination of traditional values and adaptive flexibility. The Golden Age validated everything their ancestors endured, justified every sacrifice made during the brutal early years, and demonstrated that even the harshest beginnings can lead to remarkable achievement. Religious diversity flourishes throughout Lhazaar history, with various faiths finding homes in different principalities. The blood of Val maintains strong presence in Farlnen and spreads to other communities, attracting those drawn to its philosophy regarding death and existence. The sovereign host finds adherents throughout the principalities, particularly among those with stronger connections to mainland culture. The Silver Flame gains some followers, though its emphasis on fighting evil and darkness sometimes clashes with Lhazaar pragmatism about what constitutes acceptable behavior. And older beliefs, remnants of traditions brought from Sarlona or developed during the early years of settlement, persist in various forms throughout the islands. The knowledge and expertise developed during the Golden Age represent perhaps its most enduring legacy. Maritime skills passed down through generations and refined through centuries of experience make Lhazaar sailors and navigators among the finest in the world. Shipbuilding techniques developed here are copied, often imperfectly, by mainlanders who recognize their superiority. Understanding of weather patterns, ocean currents, seasonal variations, and the 1,000 subtle factors that determine success or failure at sea is encoded in oral traditions and practical training that continues even when the Golden Age ends. The cultural achievements of these centuries are less tangible but equally significant. The sea shanties sung on Lhazaar vessels carry melodies and verses that will be remembered and performed for generations. Preserving history and values in forms that survive when written records are lost or destroyed. Scrimshaw carving reaches artistic heights that make pieces created by master craftspeople valuable enough to be displayed in mainland galleries and collected by nobles who have never set foot on a ship. Storytelling traditions preserve not only the founding myths of Lhazaar herself, but also the accumulated adventures and tragedies of centuries, creating rich oral history that defines cultural identity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the golden age of the Lhazaar Principalities, those 800 years when salt and steel built empires and maritime culture flourished under the protection of Galifar's peace, please consider subscribe to Lore DND, leaving a like on this video. The waters of lore are vast and deep, and there are always more stories waiting to be told. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may fair winds fill your sails.